And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow. Ride boldly, ride. The shade replied, if you seek for El Dorado.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Edgar Allan Poe's El Dorado.
Yeah, that's one of his last poems. One of the last poems that he wrote. And it has that air of death about it.
Bleak, beautiful Baltimore. Can you imagine what that town would have been like? Very like a crappy version of London. I imagine it had a lot of.
There is still a lot of crime in Baltimore. Baltimore is a crime-riddled place. But it gave us John Waters.
Yeah. and
there's a lot of perverts in Baltimore, I think.
A lot of perverts in Baltimore?
Yeah.
I guess he's sort of taken that term back. Perverts. You know what's great in Baltimore? It's very John Waters-y. There's an outsider art museum there. It's super sick. And it's a lot of things that were made in like insane asylums. Someone made a perfect replica of the Titanic with like toothpicks, and I was like, why is this outsider art? And I think the answer was like, because they also used the toothpicks.
More than once. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Le Grande Bouffe.
The Big Feast.
With myself, Cole Smithey, and my co-host, Mike Lacy. As always, we are here to copiously consume international politics and culture through the prism of a single film and a different craft beer each week.
Glad to be here. Talking about a movie that I've had a lot of relationship with. A lot of whether I want to say I'm really into it or not. And I think it's existed in a very interesting place in the cultural ethos.
It is a phenomenal film that came out in 1999. And we're working a little bit backwards because we did American Psycho, and now we backpedaled to Fight Club. When American Psycho, they came out, one of the taglines on the poster was, "The next Fight Club."
Oh, really?
Yeah. And Fight Club really set off a firestorm. It was not well received by critics, and Hollywood really cut back on the violence in their films. I think if you go back and you look at the films that were made in 2000 and 2001, American Psycho is a exception, but there was so much backlash against this film that Hollywood really cut down on violence for a while.
This movie is maybe the epitome of a pre-9/11 movie.
Well, it is the pre-9/11 movie, considering what happens at the end of this movie, and
at the beginning too.
I hate to tell you, guys, there's no point in continuing to listen to this podcast if you don't want some serious spoilers, because we have got to cut into this thing.
Yeah. So, like in real life, how Osama bin Laden was really just a alternate personality of George W. Bush. Is that your point? Is that what you're saying? That he's just at night became George W. Bush, and during the day he was Osama bin Laden? Like, was that your point? The parallel?
You're very perceptive, Mike.
You were trying to make?
Yeah, that's it. You hit the nail on the head.
I'm just saying that the bin Ladens and the Bushes did a lot of business together in the Carlyle group. It's all out there. You can look it up. Project Mayhem is real.
I mean, it's based on a Chuck Palahniuk novel, of course, by the same title.
Is that the pronunciation? I have no idea.
Yeah, Chuck Palahniuk. That's how you say it. And Jared Leto. Speaking of corollaries or circumstance, Jared Leto, who was in, of course, he would play Paul Allen in American Psycho, and he's the blonde guy in this movie.
Right.
Who Edward Norton just pummels to
the living shit kicked out of him.
Really beats the shit out of him. Sends him to the hospital.
This movie meant a lot to me a few years after it came out, because I was embarrassingly young when it did come out. And it had a following, and I just remember finding things on like the what's comparatively the early internet now about it, and there's such a culture, and it still exists between just memes about like the rules of Fight Club, but also there's just like a tremendous amount of sort of unofficial swag and just like lifestyle things associated with it. Not to mention kids actually like fighting each other that came from it. But more than that, I think it left a deep trace of this sort of postmodern disconnect with the ideal way to live your life, the IKEA catalog cookie cutter way to like just get a job and get married and be a person. It really, I think, personified a lot of that. And it's really curdled though into having a lot of associations with, I would say,
well, with 9/11.
Well, no, I was gonna, but more specifically, currently, like men's rights, the alt-right, like Project Mayhem has kind of gone from this healthy dose of anarchism to a specifically like anti-female sort of thing.
Yeah, right wing.
It's hard
mentality.
It's hard to watch that without seeing the traces of that, and I don't think that's where it came from.
It's interesting to me to see the corollaries between Trainspotting, which is 1995, just 4 years before this, and this movie has a similar jaundiced eye on capitalism and a very violent and frenetic way of expressing that energy, and of course with American Psycho. So I think when there are three.
If we're going backwards, we got to do Trainspotting next.
I know. Well, yeah, I think you're right. We probably do have to do Trainspotting. Trainspotting is another movie that critics had a hard time with because it was so dark. It was just so brutal, but by the same token, it had this great gloss of wit and just incredible use of music, which this movie has too. And this is David Fincher's follow-up to The Game. He made Alien 3 in 1992, and then he made 7 in 1995, a great year for cinema, 1995. And then The Game in 1997, which I had a little bit part in. I don't know if you can see me as one of the extras.
Oh, I forget. Yeah, you've brought that up before. I love The Game. It's minor Fincher, but it's great.
Yeah. Well, exactly. It's minor Fincher, but then it launches you into Fight Club, which is just. I mean, I was my wife and I watched it last night, and I was saying that. It might be his best movie. And then I relented and said, no, Zodiac might be his best movie, but it's a really strong movie. This is satire, blistering satire. That said, I could cut 10 minutes of it. I really felt like my biggest complaint about this movie, it's 2 hours and 12 minutes long. I think it could easily lose those 10 or 12 minutes. I wish that it had gone under the knife one more time.
You know what strikes me rewatching it is, though it is based on a book, compared to films that are made now, it is remarkably free of source material. It's not a comic book or anything like that. And yet it is so rich with iconography in this certain universe and is introducing you to characters in this way as if they are... it's hard to tell what's my relationship with it and what's the movie really presenting in terms of its characters and its world. But there is something so grand and archetypical about the way that introduces Marla Singer, how it introduces Tyler Durden. It starts with Bob, too. All of these are these kind of like, for me, maybe because I was ripe, these like stand-in symbols for these like counter these atypical forces in the universe.
The movie's very self-reflexive, and I love the whole bit about Tyler Durden working as a projectionist, and he's splicing in little clips of a penis. And Fincher, in the beginning of the film, we're seeing Brad Pitt's character in little clips. He shows up in little scenes, and so there's this mocking aspect to the way the movie's constructed that's just really fun.
Right. Yeah. The one that I spotted that I loved is when he's in the hotel room and they watch a little video where it's all the people in the white serving jackets going, welcome. You can see.
Oh yeah, the banquet waiters at the Pressman Hotel.
But the video on the TV in one of the hotels, it was just that pre-roll that plays on the TV. One of those is Tyler, and then we see him at the airport. And yeah, it is this sort of next level MTV, almost post MTV subversion of fast moving, like intellectually aimed cameras. And it definitely feels like it came out the same year as The Matrix and used super stylized fast moving cameras in a way that's like a tenth of The Matrix, but is also clearly...
Well, that opening sequence is pretty spectacular, and Fincher had done or did do a similarly themed opening sequence for Panic Room, and so it's got that Fincher touch where the camera is just going deep in the metabolism of cords and wires, and it's just great. It really gives the movie a sci-fi effect.
And are we in a brain? I think it's about to show us while we're in, but you know what stuck out to me, like speaking of like the beginning of the film, the earlier parts, is he goes to the doctor. This is the narrator who...
Our unreliable narrator, played by Ed Norton.
Yeah, who's known as the narrator, or Jack, or Jack,
or Cornelius,
or Cornelius,
or Raymond. What's the other name?
They're all names from Planet of the Apes.
Yeah,
Rupert.
Rupert. There you go, Rupert. That's it. Yeah, that's it.
Which one is it? Cornelius, Rupert, Helena Bonham Carter, who is sometimes disguising her English accent, sometimes not.
Well, and Helena Bonham Carter is an interesting character in the movie too, because you've got this whole duality of characters, with having to do with Ed Norton, and so if you're really paying attention to the movie, and you get the sense that pretty early on that Brad Pitt might not really be another person, but just another side of Ed Norton's character. And the same rule applies to Helena Bonham Carter's character, because she also... Well, let's just set up the story a little bit. So Ed Norton works this day job. It's an insurance job for auto companies, and he looks at accidents that have happened, and he does the math on whether it's worth it for the car company to recall the cars, or cheaper just to
it's almost
do
like
business as
usual. It's almost
usual.
Shorthand for he's doing the most cynical, heartless corporate job that you can imagine.
Yep.
And
he's a corporate axe man.
And I read
he's
lot
a bean counter.
There's growing up, I basically only read 3 authors. I read Chuck Palahniuk, I read David Sedaris, and I read what's this fuck the Slaughterhouse 5.
Vonnegut.
Vonnegut. Yeah, those are basically
Take a Flying Fuck and a Rolling Donut. I love that.
Yeah, those are the only 3 authors I read, and Palahniuk kind of like really
Palahniuk.
Palahniuk.
Yeah, Chuck Palahniuk.
It's so many letters.
I know.
Just all over the place.
I know. Well, it's like the Simpsons guy, Matt Groening. No one knows how to pronounce his name.
That's the last thing it should be is Groening.
Groening. I know.
Yeah,
that's what these confusing Eastern European names.
Yeah. Well, so his voice is very present through it, and it meshes well with Fincher, but I think gives it an edge that is not present in Fincher. I kind of feel like David Fincher is a bit voiceless, if you just see like where he takes material that is
he worked
less
very hard. He
interesting.
worked very hard on getting the tone of this movie right, and he really did a lot of reaching out to fellow creative people to establish his approach to the material. And Fincher's a very meticulous person, and it just this material is so well suited to that degree of intensity and attention to detail.
If you compare it to Gone Girl, though, which I feel like it's a well assessed movie, but I find it so voiceless. Well,
this source material is just pulp. This is
right.
This is
he doesn't bring something to it.
This is social satire. This is it's black comedy. It's on the level of a film like Brazil.
But Fight Club, yeah, I feel that. Where it's like Coppola like brings so much of The Godfather that he takes like pulp and like elevates it to epic.
Well,
cinema.
when I love the scene when Ed Norton is he's sitting on the toilet looking at a catalog, and the screen is moving around his apartment, and everything that he sees in the catalog it pops up on the screen, and you see the description and the price, and he's narrating about how he has everything, and then he opens this refrigerator, and if it's typical bachelor refrigerator, nothing but condiments, and so it's all about the status quo. Here is a person not unlike Patrick Bateman, who is completely hooked into the machine.
Hey, I just want to point out, so we're watching it now, as is our standard to like put the movie on while we're talking about it. And this is scene right here. He's talking to the narrator's talking to a
hilarious.
doctor.
So funny.
And he's talking about how he can't sleep. And this, I think, is one of the most anachronistic things that I remember this movie is this doctor will not give him fucking sleeping pills, and I find that to be the most the biggest suspension of disbelief in this whole movie is that
but we were having a conversation, Mike, just before this, and we were talking about doctors and how you can't get good treatment, and so I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, I think it's funny because he could have this experience. I disagree about the suspension of disbelief because of the conversation we just had 10 minutes ago. We were talking about doctors.
I think this doctor's a great doctor. I think if he ain't like, I don't think he needs fucking like true sleeping pills. I think this doctor's giving him good advice.
No, I do too. I really do. Yeah. And of course, this is what sets off the inciting incident. We just have to bust out with it. The guy is really conflicted. He's got personality. He's
the
having
narrator or Jack. It's sort of I want to call him Jack because I at one point was in sort of like a bit of the subculture of like discussion of this movie, and like they call him Jack as he.
Anyway, Ed Norton. He's
Ed Norton.
Yeah,
or Jack.
And he's having
for my true fanboys.
He's having a personality crisis, as the near adults would say, and so again, not unlike the Patrick Bateman character, he's got this identity.
He can't sleep is
crisis.
What he knows. What he knows is that he can't sleep, and he has this sort of percolating. So
he comes up with his own solution based on what the doctor's advice. You want to see real pain? You go to the people with
First Methodist
with testicle cancer.
Yeah.
And that's what he does, and that's where he meets Bob, played by Meatloaf, the guy who since he's had his balls cut off, now he's grown giant breasts.
I'll be honest, I think this book or the movie, but also the book, which I did read around the same time I saw the movie, introduced me a bit to group culture, as in
meetings.
Meetings for various
Alcoholics
things.
Anonymous. Any you got a problem, there's a meeting group for you. And so he goes out and he starts going to different ones because what he finds is that it calms him and it enables him to go to sleep.
I think it's the movie, maybe even more than the book, is fairly I think it's actually kind of compassionate towards it. Like, it's definitely played for laughs, and there are things that are played for laughs.
Here's the scene with Ed Norton where he's hugging Meatloaf's character, and he doesn't want to do it, but he does it, and it makes us have empathy for the guy because he's a human being. He's not the Patrick Bateman guy.
Do you think this film is making fun of people who are talking about their feelings in this way?
I don't think this movie's not making fun of anyone. It's making fun of the status quo. It's making fun of the system. It's making fun of capitalism, and coincidentally, it also happens to present a very dynamic and prescient vision of what happened on 9/11.
Yeah. I don't know how much I want to hit it or not.
You have to. Anybody post 9/11. I haven't seen this movie since it came out. I distinctly remember seeing. Yeah, I distinctly remember seeing it. I was working at HWH Public Relations, and I took a coworker to see it down on West 4th, and I really loved it. I thought it was great. I was just rereading my review.
You gave it
today.
5 stars.
Yeah, I gave it an A, and so. So now to look at it, it's such a different movie because when I saw it, 9/11 hadn't happened. So you're looking at the client, bookend climax for the movie in a completely different light, because what happens is we see two buildings that do look an awful lot like the Twin Towers collapse in a very similar fashion.
Well, I mean, it's not a completely innocent environment that it's presenting those images in, you know. And I kind of want to like structure a conversation a little bit. You know, we're just talking sort of loosely about the general reactions to it. But
We're talking about the point of the satire. You know, of what Palahniuk is doing.
So let's talk more about what he's making fun of.
Well, he's okay.
Sorry, maybe not making fun of, but like, what is the narrator's world? The thing which is most definitely being critiqued
is capitalism. Is capitalism.
In consumerism, I think, even more than capitalism per se. It's not about the masters at the top. It's about the emptiness of buying to pursue your identity.
Hand in glove, because it's also, you know, getting a full-time job, taking a full-time job, wearing a suit. And, you know, one thing that we haven't talked about, of course, is that our friend Ed Norton is a very busy boy. He's working a day job. He's working as a banquet waiter at the Pressman Hotel, and he manages to start this Fight Club cult.
Yeah, we haven't fully so we're fully acknowledging the spoiler, which, like, go fuck yourself. You haven't watched this movie and you're listening to this. But Ed Norton, Tyler Durden, they're the same person in this film. And so to just call out, like, what is the bizarre thing is Tyler, who is a seemingly very lazy person, or at least just checked out of life and just pursuing his own ambitions.
He's definitely a depressed person. He's very depressed.
But he's very busy. He's
angry.
He's very effective. He's actually traveling the country, starting fight clubs everywhere. Maybe while Ed Norton is on a business trip is when he's doing this.
So he's one of these people who is locked into this Donald Trump corporate America, and his animal male instinct is telling him that he needs to make.
I forgot that Tyler that popped up. So we're watching it. Yeah, there's
he's got to make radical changes in his life, and what his alter ego, played by Brad Pitt, tells him is that we're designed to be hunters, and we're in a society of shopping. There's nothing to kill anymore. There's nothing to fight, nothing to overcome, nothing to explore. In that societal emasculation, this man is created, and he's talking about himself. So
let's just react to that, because I found that as a 14-year-old watching this a few years after it came out, super inspiring, super world-shaping. Listening to it now, I'm kind of terrified, because that sounds like the people who got Donald Trump elected. It sounds like people who I would hate to be in a room with, and who have such a basic and infuriating view and non-complex view of how the world works, and who frankly tend to have a very negative relationship with women, and who, though they have the right and should be criticizing the political establishment, the world order, present nothing of use. You know, I really
this
relate to Tyler's sentiment.
It's a coming of age story, and so, you know, what you're seeing is, you know, just like in something like The Graduate, which is another coming of age story that has a lot of corollaries with this movie. You're watching somebody's transition, and sadly, his transition is more into madness.
Right. I think that's what's maybe forgotten about it, and I tend to forget, is Brad Pitt is so hot, and Tyler Durden is so fucking emulatable.
He does not have an ounce of fat on his body.
Every single thing Tyler Durden does is
super masculine.
So fucking cool.
So cool.
But he's very masculine, but he also wants you to improve yourself, you know? Like, his first sort of like real conflict with the narrator, with Ed Norton, is just ask, man.
Yeah.
And Ed Norton's like, what are you talking about? He's like, just ask. And he's like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's like, You called me up for a reason. You want to stay at my place. You know, he's evolving you. He wants you to become better. And eventually he's running a straight up cult and he's like trying to make you be a better person.
And okay. And so just to cut into the where we're at in the story. So Ed Norton has firebombed his own house with his own apartment with dynamite. He's blown up all of his IKEA furniture.
In retrospect, that's what we realized
that he loved.
Happened.
He's had a nervous breakdown. He's had a terrible nervous breakdown. And so he tries to get back into his apartment, and the cops have blocked it off. Obviously he dynamited his place. All of his worldly possessions blew out of the window of this.
I like talking about it like this, as
high rise.
Actually, what happened?
Out of this high rise, and so this is the position that he put himself in, and then he goes out drinking, where he meets Tyler Durden, Brad Pitt at the bar, and really, what he's
meets up with him. They met earlier on the plane.
Yeah. But I'm just saying, this is where this story turns because he has given himself almost the self-made celebrity Angelina in LA. He's given himself.
Wait, what?
You know about Angelina? She took out ads for. She's very a lot of plastic surgery this woman's had, but for years she drives around LA in a pink Corvette, and she's Angelina. She's just.
This isn't like is she on like a housewife show?
No. She's never been. She's never actually. She's a person who has financed her own celebrity. But she has not.
Did she make a cool sex tape with Ray J?
No, she didn't.
Then she's not legit.
No, she's not legit. She's not legit. But neither is Tyler Durden, and that's the thing: is that Ed Norton's character creates this alter ego side of himself that he can freely communicate with and learn stuff from and receive the information, the line of thinking that he needs in order to escape this horrible status quo existence that has caused this cataclysm in his brain.
Can I pause for a moment and just have a lit theory conversation with you? Because I like the way that you're talking about it, which is acknowledging what the reality of the film must be, right? But like your description is also not what the experience of it.
No,
and just thinking about things with an unreliable narrator, where we are seeing the reality as it's not.
It's all a puzzle, and by the time you get to the scene where you're watching the surveillance tapes and you realize that there is no Tyler Durden, that he is inflicting this pain on himself, it's also a very punk rock thing to do. I want to talk about how he gets in the situation with his boss, and his boss is trying to fire him, and he starts to beat himself up. Yeah, that is a classic punk rock behavior, and stop
hitting me. Yeah,
I mean it's like I will give you the brutalization that your treatment of me. Here's a fleshed out version of what you're doing to me.
Well,
and as a way to trap you.
So let me ask you, as from a literary perspective or a film criticism one, can we say what the reality is and talk? So it's for example, you brought up that Ed Norton firebombs his own apartment. Now that's not as it's presented. It must be what the case is, given what we know at the end of the movie. But once you've established that what you're watching is an unreliable sequence of events.
Yeah.
Doesn't it become kind of messy, unraveling where exactly the turns and plot points are?
Well, that's why you can't watch this movie just once. The first time that you watch this movie is very different experience from the second time that you watch it. And, therein right there, lies a trick, because that sets this movie apart. And I would say, realistically, I would say the same thing for Trainspotting and for American Psycho. I think that these are movies and for Brazil, these are movies that you don't get them on one pass, because there's a lot of information that's being meted out in very subtle and specific ways. But you're not capable of reading them in the context of the narrative scope. So this is something that happens when you're adapting a novel. You're at a so much bigger advantage because there's so much more rich detail to draw on.
Watch the video on the far right. In the far right, there's Tyler. Yeah.
And that looks like a scene from The Graduate when Ed Norton's sitting on the bed.
Oh, yeah.
Except he doesn't have Anne Bancroft, sadly.
Right.
But he will have Helena Bonham Carter, which is pretty good. And I also want to point out, this is something that Catherine pointed out, is that in the main credits for the movie, it says Ed Norton, Brad Pitt, Meatloaf.
Helena Bonham Carter isn't top billed in it?
No.
99, I want to say she wasn't such a box office name as.
But it doesn't matter. Her part in this movie is, I'm guessing, a good 4 or 5 times more than Meatloaf's
Yeah,
part.
I mean, I regret just saying what I was saying because, yes, absolutely. And it just, speaks to Hollywood's misogyny.
Exactly. It plays right into the movie. This is like a place where reality just seeps right into the satire.
You have to wonder about these credits, because if you're watching the credits, you already bought the ticket. You're not going to care.
No, well, I'm talking about, for example, I watch it on Amazon, and so when I pull it up on my screen,
oh, I see.
It has the name of the movie and it has the top billed
I don't
cast.
know. I don't know what. I know that billing is such a crucial Hollywood insider complex thing, and there's
and it's frequently written into contracts about how how it's to be treated.
I wonder if the Amazon billing is tied to, or the IMDb billing, which I think that's what that's related to, is tied to as it appears in credits. Likely, I would assume IMDb mirrors that. But thinking about the world that it was criticizing.
Okay, well,
let me bring up another movie that came out this year. Hold on,
we got to talk about the beer.
Oh, you know what? Let's do it.
Okay, so the reason that Mike is slurring his words, just as I planned, is because we're drinking a double dog.
Double dog.
From Flying Dog. And it's a double IPA. And I figure, because obviously these guys are clearly dogs, Brad Pitt and Ed Norton.
And there's a lot of psychological doubling happening here for certain.
So I thought the Double Dog would be a good pick. And I love this beer because it's one of those one and done IPAs. It's really tasty, and it does not taste like the 11.5% ABV that it has.
Jeez.
So this thing will put you on your butt.
Oh my god.
That's right.
I did not have a fucking dinner before this. This is not a good idea.
So anyway, Flying Dog, Double Dog, one and done double IPA. Love it. Tastes great. It's got that nice bitter hoppy thing that I love. It may be my favorite beer today.
So what I was getting at, and I'd like to pivot in a second to modern day, but what is the world, anything else we want to hit on the world that's critiquing? Speaking of 1999, another big movie that came out this year was American Beauty. And things I've heard people talking about 99 as like a year of excellent films. Like, let's just throw 3 giant box office films, which stand up and are good to watch, and are saying a lot about the period where they came out. American Beauty, Fight Club, and The Matrix. All critiquing essentially the same thing in a certain way.
All right, and also Magnolia.
Sure. I think it's less of a specific satire of the time, but yeah.
And also Eyes Wide Shut.
I could see that maybe being a little closer, but yeah, these are, we're just talking about amazing.
And also The Insider.
Was Being John Malkovich that year too?
And Being John Malkovich.
The Blair Witch Project. Yeah, there's
Election.
Yep.
There was a lot to do, and Boys Don't Cry. There was a lot to do with social consciousness and social responsibility.
Well, let's narrow it down to just Fight Club and say that it's a very sharp criticism of the emptiness of pursuit towards nothing. And I think Tyler gives us a bit
of status quo. That's
the pursuit of progress as defined by an illegitimate authority. I think Tyler really gives us a bit of the through line, which is, I called my dad. My dad said, I asked my dad what I should do now, and he said, go to college. I graduated college. He said, get a job. I got a job. He said, get married. Why that sequence of events? Why this hollow sort of baby boomer inspired progression towards what? Towards what? Towards what?
Well, see, that's the thing is, I think that this movie is about embracing hopelessness, and it's the Slavoj Zizek idea of, everyone's thinks that there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but the light at the end of the tunnel is a locomotive that's coming to certainly kill you. And that's what I think this movie is. This movie is about embracing the hopelessness that 9/11 inflicted. Oh, I love how it's a scat yellow cab. It's always a scat yellow cab. But yeah, this movie is about just the hopelessness. You have to give up hope. That's what this movie's about. I actually think that's a very respectable narrative.
But I think
message.
But I think Slavoj Žižek, the great contemporary philosopher, we don't know him. I think he would say, what Fight Club expertly demonstrates is the ability of capitalism to adjust to all criticism of itself, in that even Fox Films and Pepsi Cola, if you look at all the product placement in Fight Club, you are indoctrinated further deeper as your criticism becomes subsumed into the deeper.
Slavoj, have another drink.
I'm saying?
I finished mine.
This is a film which is entirely anti-corporations, that was funded by a major motion picture house that was distributed.
Yeah, you couldn't make this. Well, they wouldn't make
dollars.
this movie today, clearly, because they don't make these movies anymore. Can you believe The Sixth Sense came out in that year too, and The Green Mile? It really was a good year for movies. Even The Mummy, which I liked. God bless Brendan.
99 was an amazing year for movies.
Brendan Fraser, and Office Space, another great satire, which has relevance to this movie.
Absolutely.
Office Space has a lot of stuff in common with this movie.
Office Space is honestly the low budget version of this. If you can't afford the explosions and the CGI, you just basically have someone taking their cubicle apart and going on a vacation on the job.
But there were some real dogs that came out this year too, because Kevin Smith's Dogma. Have you ever seen that?
I mean, I loved it as a 12-year-old.
Oh, it's the worst. And Martin Scorsese's Bringing Out the Dead, which is also one of Martin Scorsese's worst. It may even be his worst movie. It's just unwatchable.
That's Nick Cage as an ambulance driver from hell or something.
It's so awful.
So we've talked about...
Oh, and Deep Blue Sea. Deep Blue Sea is really good. Shark movie.
Really good.
Really good.
So... I don't know, anything more you want to hit about the 90s? What are we critiquing? What is that about? I mean, I think if not for 9/11, right? Where would we have pivoted and transitioned and blossomed into?
It's the epoch. It's the turn of the century. That's the big deal about this movie, is that it's all of that pent up anxiety. People.
We were worried about computers fucking destroying us on Y2K for no goddamn reason.
This is what I'm talking about. The whole Y2K crisis, and obviously, Chuck Palahniuk had his hand on the pulse of something, because he saw 9/11 coming. There's just no two ways around it. And so the political unrest is a big seething undercurrent in the subtext of this thing.
Maybe let's not step into exact modern day, but talk about the political message of the destruction that happens in this. What they do is, and it's not very explicit in the film, and I don't want to lean too heavy on what the book makes a bit clearer, but they are blowing up credit card headquarters. I think the book makes a little bit clear that this takes place in Delaware, which actually is the location of many credit card companies, and they are blowing them up because
I wish the movie had been more specific about its location.
Yeah, and so with the theory being that pre the records all being on the cloud, if you blow up the records of everyone's credit, then no one has bad credit, no one has good credit.
And I'd like to point out that there is there's a lot of fact built into that about the way that the felling of the two Twin Towers on 9/11 affected a lot of financial
record keeping of people's.
Yeah, more than that. I'll come clean and tell you that I was part of a huge class action lawsuit, and our attorneys were in 9/11, and all of our records gone. And believe me, it changed our case. When you lose all your records, your case can't go anywhere.
Right.
And so, just from anecdotal experience of my own, related to 9/11, I can tell you that I personally lost a lot of money as a result of that day.
Sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
Clearly.
These things happen, evidently. It was a real shock, like, wow, I can be affected by crazy shit. I never knew.
Yeah. And, but, so, there's, to unpack the symbolism of it, in this film, they're destroying credit card companies at night. In order to zero out the balance, to zero out everyone right. in the countries. It's kind of a Robin Hood mission that they're on. And it's, if you think about it, they probably killed some security guards and cleaning people, definitely, And just to put the pieces together, this is all as a result of the Fight Club, because once Fight Club has been around for a while, then it morphs into this radical group where they take these terrorist missions, and this is called what's it called? Mayhem Project. Yeah, I think the movie kind of posits that there's a sequence of things which draw you further and further from the sort of placated sheep mentality that you're supposed to be in, and the first step into that is an emotionally honest state, and meeting Bob, going to these support groups, and then I think meeting someone like Marla Singer, who is a bit of a criminal, it has a little Harold and Maude to it, because just as Ruth Gordon was going to all the funerals where Bud Cort showed up at, it's sort of a similar thing. I feel you've got Ed Norton showing up, and his rival is this chain smoking, sunglass wearing brunette who is clearly on the same tip that he is, which is she's a tourist, as he calls her, and of course so is he. So that you hate the people that are most like you, and that's how their relationship, their fraught relationship starts. She's sort of another rung or deeper chamber into being a truly subversive figure, being on the outside of what is safe, and you wind up essentially being a terrorist and blowing up these buildings. Well, the interesting thing about her character is that she's the only female in the movie, and she acts in a very masculine way. She's always smoking. She's not playing up the glamour, cute, sex kitten thing at all. Oh, even though she really is a pretty horny girl. I was always very attracted to Marla Singer, and there's definitely something enduring about someone who is checked out of society and the world in this way, whether it's for the pursuit of something higher and more engaging, or in Marla's case, it kind of seems like she has a bit of a drug addict, sex addict mentality. Yeah, but either way, she's not she's not so troubled about
her man Tyler's personality defects, and they're on display.
And she's someone who's like not concerned about either. She doesn't watch The Big Bang Theory, and she's also not upset that The Big Bang Theory has so many viewers. You know what I mean?
Well, she doesn't give a fuck.
She
about
doesn't
anything.
give a fuck
about anything.
and
But she likes to get banged, and that comes across very, very clearly.
Yeah, yeah.
Just saying.
So just one sort of like full circle I want to come in on is it's interesting. So we're saying that this movie portrays the explosion of buildings which look a lot like the Twin Towers, but there are this isn't me defending the movie. This is me just pointing out what is interesting in its difference from
All right, spit
the
it
nipples in 9/11.
Spit it out.
Is that
nipples in 9/11?
No, the difference between 9/11, not the nipples in 9/11.
Well, I know there's a difference between the nipples.
Yeah. So they blow these buildings up at night, and 9/11 purposely happened during day, and it's a difference between trying to free people from destroying financial institutions to trying to in essence, hurt people and cripple people by destroying the symbols of capitalism in America. Though arguably you could say that the impulse to destroy the Twin Towers was to free people elsewhere, not the people directly. But it's kind of
It had the same net effect in on various levels, and I don't want to get into all the nitty gritty because there's just too much nitty gritty there. It's a wormhole, a rabbit hole, if you will. But the fact that Chuck Palahniuk was so prescient in articulating things in this movie that even by today's standards are pretty radical ideas, really looking at the system and status quo for the sham that it is.
I think we took, and this is not a radical thought, but took many steps backwards in terms of self-criticism, steps which places like Germany, the UK to some extent, did not so much take, where when you had this consumerism seeping into the 21st century, you developed a sort of self-criticism, and people stepped deeper into socialism, into creating a more universal welfare, and realizing that the limits that the market could come on just doing good for people. What the best thing that ever happened to capitalism was the destruction of its symbols, and you had people like former presidential candidates who were like,
"Where's all this past tense coming from? We're still in the soup, man. What are you talking about?"
I'm saying we're more in it than ever, and because of 9/11, there is this subliminal link of patriotism and spending. You never remember what George Bush said after on 9/12, which was the most patriotic thing you can do is go shopping.
Yes, I do remember that. That was when they had given Osama bin Laden had given he had told the U.S. that he had nothing to do with the bombing, and they were asking for any proof, and they would turn him over, and no proof was ever admitted. But we sure did manage to make a huge amount of cash disappear in those first 18 hours after the thing, and then of course all of the debris was put on boats and shipped to China. So all of the debris from 9/11 was all inexplicably shipped very, very quickly, excavated and evacuated from the country.
I'm not gonna get on
I'm just stating the facts, man. I'm just stating the facts.
I will say,
don't put the T word on me. This is the F word. The F word. Those are the facts. That's the facts.
I will say one of the coolest factoids I have is factoids.
Oh,
yeah, factoids.
I hope I don't have to clean it up later.
I have an ex-girlfriend whose father was contracted to help clean up Flight 93, and he gave her a little piece of it.
Aw, that's so sweet.
I probably shouldn't have said that.
That's cute.
Right?
Yeah.
Just a little
He cares.
bit of the tail wing.
Here you go, honey.
Put on your little dresser.
Yeah, put it on your necklace. And
So, I think we're getting close to wrapping up. To just, from like some modern eyes, in addition to this being, a great film,
great satire,
and just like eminently watchable, and just Fincher at his height. Just it's his most both frenetic and also digestible. Like, it's just such a fun fucking.
It's a really fun movie. It could lose 10 minutes. I think it would be a better movie if it lost 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think that is one lesson we've learned since '99. That you rarely see a 2-hour, like 19-minute film that's not based on a comic book. But what do you feel watching this and hearing the rhetoric that's coming out of Tyler? From a modern context, from a post-Trump context, what would you think of if someone just spat you these lines that Tyler's reading? What's your reaction given today's climate? And I think we'll have different reactions.
You have to take this movie in the context that it's presented, and
but knowing that it's not.
Just let me finish. Yeah. It's a Gen X movie. This is a total Gen X movie, and I can tell you, when I saw the movie, I was working at a public relations company by day, and I was working as a banquet waiter at a hotel by night, and so I felt a lot of cohesion with this character, and the mindset that this character is in is of the turning of the century. It's all of this angst that, even though we thought Y2K was going to be the thing, it was really 9/11 that was the thing. And then, of course, 7 years later, in 2008, we had the economic crisis, and we saw the bottom fall out of the country again. So this movie is about a huge collapse in the country, really watching a underpinning of American culture and identity, self-identity, capitalism, status quo, all these different things. Seeing that first collapse, that first shoe drop. And sure enough, 2 years later it happened, and then 7 years later it happened again, and guess what? It's going to happen again sooner than later. So this, like I said about the Slavoj Zizek thing, I did like your impression, even though I'm glad I don't have to use that microphone. It is about looking at the light at the end of the tunnel and realizing that light, that's not the sun. That's a locomotive that's headed straight for you. And that's what this movie is all about. Yeah.
I like that. I agree with all of that, that this movie is so prescient to some shit gonna go down. I will say, though, what I feel watching it is, what's Tyler's idea? What's his organizing principle besides destruction? And this is a bit of what I feel like we're facing. As I feel like we have a White House of Tyler Durden's, honestly.
Let's be clear about it. This is a guy who's not getting advice. He's not asking for advice. He's looking into himself. This is a total J.D. Salinger kind of guy.
Him being Ed Norton. Narrator.
Yeah. He's not like calling up his buddies and saying, "Hey, man, I'm having this crisis of identity and whatever existence." This what's the word? You know the word.
A mental breakdown.
Sorry, existential. This existential crisis.
Right.
He's having this existential crisis, but he's only informing himself, so he has to split himself to use this alter identity of himself, so that he can survive, so that he can exist, so that he can behave, because he's so lost.
And what he gains when he does that is just this hyper masculine sense of chaos and
I used to have this friend of mine, Larry, he was a projectionist at the Campus Drive-In in San Diego, where I saw many fine films, And Larry was this tall black guy. He was really skinny. He had a drum kit. He was a drummer. This great Yamaha drum kit. And he used to tell me, about how, he got in an argument with his wife or whatever. And he'd say, but I was smelling my balls.
What?
Yeah, smelling my balls. And it's a thing that, he when pushed by his woman, he would get in this mindset of, and you see it with the way Ed Norton treats Helena Bonham Carter when he's talking to Tyler down in the basement, and Tyler tells him what to say, and he turns and he's like, "Yeah, we're not having this conversation." And it's the same kind of thing where it's this guy's on his own. It's very primal. He's the lone gorilla, and he's gonna survive by his instincts, and that's what's going on.
I'll let you have the last word there. Yeah, I don't know.
Ta-da!
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for listening. I hope that you will go on iTunes and like us and review us and tell all of your friends about it. And of course, if you go to colesmithy.com, you can see the link to the Patreon site where you can pledge your support. And of course, there are lovely little rewards. If you decide to give us $5 a month, I will salute you from my desk and raise a glass to you at dinner. If you give us just $10 a month, I'll feature your name in a special thank you blog post in my film blog of my website, and for $20 or more you can send me anything you want and I'll sign it. And there is a little price point where you can even be a co-host on the Grande Bouffe, so check it out.
They're as good as me?
On Patreon. Well, for 1 week, yes.
Okay.
For 1 week, just for 1 week though.
I'll allow it.
Good, great. Thank you all so much for listening. Please remember to turn your cell phones off when you're walking, driving, riding a bicycle, or watching a movie.